Thankfully, I wasn't at Hampden on Sunday. It was we just wanted to set things up for a good season next year. So I'm really delighted to be here. Had a fantastic day so far. All the presentations, including what we just heard from Karen's, been really fantastic. I think I had something in common with every presentation, although when Mike Logie was presenting, I thought, what will I have in common with him? Until he mentioned the nurses. I used to run the nurses' dances in Joanna's in Bath Street back in the day until the police caught up with us. So they're a great audience, nurses, overall. Great to hear what's happening in the north of Glasgow. That it was really inspirational. My parents are both from the north of Glasgow, from Apostle Park and Springburn. My parents were Mary and Joseph. So it really does explain the life of Brian and all that's about to come. So, Castle Milk and beyond. I'm actually a south side boy. I started life in the south side of Glasgow. I'm going to talk through some kind of major brand events that I was involved with, brand happenings, and my career and how it intermingled with these brand events. So Castle Milk, where it all started, and then went to Ballanark, went to Ballanark. I could write the book on the housing schemes of Glasgow. I became a chartered accountant back when you could do it straight from school in the 70s with what is now KPMG, was Pete Marwick back then. Went to one of their clients, Polaroid, and that was the start of my career working for Americans. I've more or less spent 30 years working for American companies and think it really influenced how I approach business. Then went to another American company across the Clyde in Port Glasgow, Playtex underwear, big manufacturer back then with around 600 people manufacturing. Sales and marketing down in Woking in Surrey. And I became their UK finance director at the age of 28. I then went to Paris to be their European finance director. I was 30. I speak French. I had to learn French. There was a lot of French people who thought they were bilingual until I arrived. And actually, back in those days, it was handy to be able to speak French. And actually, as a bit of advice, if you ever get an opportunity to learn a language, I would say take it. It really helps you understand the culture. It helps people understand you. You totally miss out if you don't speak the local language. So I learned French. I was there for 3 years, and I went to the States to be the worldwide CFO. By which time I'm 33. Some names there. Some of you may recognise KKR, one of the biggest buyout companies in the world. They were real pioneers back then. We were part of one of the world's biggest leveraged buyouts back then, funded entirely by debt. We had more debt than we had sales, which is a fairly 10 times debt to equity. These were the good old days, and your mortgage at 12%, Karen, actually wasn't too bad. We were paying 14% back in those days, and I was the CFO of this mess, so it really was a bit of a challenge. I often think I was too young to realise how stressful it really should have been. I was up and down to Manhattan and Wall Street, regularly presenting to banks and to analysts and so on, and just getting on with it somehow or another. And it all worked out well. We then sold to the Sterling Corporation, a big American conglomerate. We all made a lot of money back then. Personally, I went to the States with 20 grand, bought a Nissan ZX. The 20 grand was gone, and everything else we had was borrowed. I even borrowed money from the bank in Kilmacombe to invest in the company. But it all worked out well, and when we sold to Sterling, I became relatively wealthy at that stage. Sterling owned fantastic brands around the world, including most of the underwear brands around the world. They had a great brand in Canada called Wonderbra. I decided, after doing the integration with Sterling, I decided to come back to the UK with my family. And I became the managing director of Playtex in the UK. Wonderbra had been licensed to a competitor in the UK. And I wasn't having that, so I got the license back. I effectively bought it out again. And I launched the one and only Wonderbra. Not sure if anybody can remember her name. I'm sure you can remember her look. It was Eva Herzegovina. I had dinner with her when she was 21. I almost could not speak. She was so disarmingly sexy. Until we got on to talk about American sport, and then we really had a great time. But it was it was my first ever campaign in marketing, and a pretty phenomenal one as it turned out. The amazing thing, and we heard, throughout the day, we've heard about PR. The PR value that we got from Wonderbra from that campaign was just absolutely phenomenal. As you see here, we only spent 160,000 on advertising, but after 6 months, the PR value of what we had done was measured at 20 million. So really phenomenal. I became a spokesman on behalf of women. I was telling how women really like to feel sexy at some point in their life, and the physical benefit that Wonderbra gave them a great emotional boost in their life. And at some point or another, every woman wanted to say hello, boys. Whether it was the Friday night or just arriving on the dance floor or whatever it was, at some point we all wanted to say hello, boys. Somehow or other, women bought into it, and it was a huge success. And to all women out there, you're welcome. The Americans never quite got it. With all due respect to any Americans here, they thought hello, boys was a bit risky. So it became Hello New York, which lost a wee bit of the magic, but never one to miss an opportunity. I came up with the Glasgow version. But, never quite made it through, I'm not sure why. But in 2011, 20 years after it launched, it was voted the best outdoor ad campaign of all time. So pretty much a phenomenon, and when you measure it in terms of numbers, a $10 million business became a $200 million business in between 18 and 24 months. So it really was a phenomenon, and it's one of the brands that actually defines the 90s in many ways. I was always terrified that somebody somewhere would say something wrong. We were doing so well with the PR, and that I would say something wrong, or that one of my team would say something wrong. So I made sure everybody really understood who the Wonderbra woman was. She was a subject, she was a woman, she was sexy, and all of these adjectives that are here. But I still wasn't confident that everybody got it until I did this. I actually said, here's what she's not. And that actually was a great deal more defining, and saying what she is and what she isn't was absolutely defining. But I actually found from that point onwards that whenever I had to define anything, how we were going to run a business, what a brand is, what a mood is, whatever it is, it's much more compelling and I think clear when you say what it's not, rather than necessarily what it is. And I've used that technique throughout my career. The other thing we discovered is we pretty much threw the rule book out in terms of traditional marketing. We all had come out of a more P&G type, Procter & Gamble type approach to brand launches, when you would have had advertising and creative pretty balanced. But Wonderbra, the big success was PR. The big success was the fact that Harrods wanted Wonderbra in every one of the windows in the Brompton Road. And most of the media, most of the communication we got actually was free. And like most great strategies, they're written in retrospect. So I went back and figured out how all this effectively had happened. And every other launch we did thereafter, we effectively always planned everything around this concept of how do we get the free media. So whenever we were doing advertising creative, we were thinking about how can we excite the press about it, rather than necessarily how would we go out there and spend money on advertising. I then took over all the hosiery businesses of Lee around Europe, and I then led the takeover of Courtaulds Textiles. They were the biggest apparel manufacturer in the UK. 20,000 people, £1.5 billion of a business I was running then. Unfortunately, some total numpties took over Lee in Chicago at this time, as subsequent events have proven. We were never ever going to get along, and I left them in June 2002. Then went to do something reasonably unusual. I went back to college to play the guitar. I always had played. I'm a child of the 60s. We'd all played Dylan and Beatles, pretty much all of our young years, but I never played it that well. But I went back to college and did a full-time degree in music in Guildford. I never quite get through it because along came this guy, and I got an offer of a job that you really couldn't refuse, to become his first president for Europe. It's Ralph Lauren, of course. And just a couple of words about Ralph Lauren, a real entrepreneur. Started the business with 26 boxes of ties back in 1967. I often tell them it's the second most significant thing that happened in 1967. The other was Celtic winning the European Cup, which didn't seem to resonate with them that well as it happens. Although I had to convince Ralph to do suits for Glasgow Celtic, and he had to approve of it. And I met him once in Manhattan in the back of his Bentley, and we're driving downtown, and I'm telling him about Celtic and our origins and charity and everything else. And he at one point said, I think I can identify with this club. I would like to come and see them. And I thought, shit. I just had this feeling of I'm walking up Kerrydale Street, with people with pies. And thankfully we did the suits and he never came. But Anyway, he started his business, 26 boxes of ties. He came up with the concept of a lifestyle brand, which was polo. He got the idea from the movies. He was a short guy, brought up in the Bronx, and he spent a lot of time going to the movies, pretty much staying out the streets. He loved the British movies. He loved Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn and whatever. And he loved this idea of polo as being something really aspirational. So that's what he called his brand. Back then, there wasn't lifestyle brands. He sold these ties to Bloomingdale's. They then asked him to do some other products, some jackets, some shirts. He then said, I'll do them, but I want them all presented together, which wasn't how things were back then. You had your shirt department, your sweater department, and so on. He says, no, I want them all together, and I want props. I want it to feel like a gentleman's dressing area. And he effectively, out of his imagination, created a shop-in-shop. And every department store now in the world is full of shopping shops. But the first ever came from the imagination of Ralph Lauren. So he started with 26 boxes of ties. The company today is worth 12 billion. So it's not been a bad story. From what was a poor kid growing up in the Bronx. Ralph will tell you it takes a lifetime to understand the Ralph Lauren brand. It really, really doesn't. It's one of the easiest brands in the world to actually define. But not in Ralph's world. When you're with Ralph, he's constantly telling you and teaching you about the brand. But what it is a timeless luxury lifestyle brand. This is a great Ralph himself modelled quite a bit in his younger years for the brand. And this is a typical shot of him. He loved double-breasted and low-button double-breasted. He's got a great tuxedo on. And he's barefoot, and that's really Ralph Lauren as well, to be very comfortable in your clothes and very relaxed. It's timeless elegance. These looks, these products, these fabrics could be from the 30s. In fact, they're current. That guy in the far right was my golf salesman from Europe, and he's a part-time model for Ralph. I often described it as the party we all wanted to be invited to, the friends we wanted to have, the club you wanted to join. Very, very aspirational. All created by Bruce Weber, probably one of the world's most renowned photographers. Created Ralph Lauren, Image, Calvin Klein, Abercrombie and Fitch, and a lot of others. But really, he could bring through still life things very much to life overall, as he did with Ralph. Ralph would design, and they continue to design around concepts. He doesn't say these are the colour palettes for this season. These are the looks. He says, I make movies, I don't design fashion. And what it means is this situation here, this concept, was a group of friends who all went on a photographic safari. They were affluent, they were successful. In the evening, they would get together and have dinner in Africa. What would they wear? They would wear loadings, they would wear khakis, they would wear tan leather, they would wear straw hats, they would wear linens, they would wear soft cottons. In the evenings, they may put on some fine-gauge cashmere. So he would create this sort of three-dimensional real event that was happening, and that's where all of the clothes and the ideas and the colours all came from. There'd be three concepts effectively every season. It could be Adirondack cabin, it could be a Hyannis port on the beach, but there were all situations in which a group of people would be together, and what would they be wearing? And that's how you would design. 30 years after starting the company, he took it public in 1997 on the US Stock Exchange. He acquired back the licenses for Europe 2001, 2002. I joined him in 2003, the most significant thing that ever happened in the history of Ralph Lauren. According to me, there's something obviously really wrong with that photograph. I'm not showing any cuff, the things that I think my white cuff, which is terrible. I almost didn't join. The last comment I'll make about Celtic, I almost didn't join Ralph Lauren because I've been interviewed 3 times with him already. And he wanted to see me again. And he wanted to see me on May 20th, 2003. And it's when Celtic were in Seville. And I said, no, I'm not coming. I'll come next week and whatever. And I said, 60,000 of my closest family are going to be at a football match. So I didn't go. I went to Seville. We got beaten extra time. It's all about Celtic getting beat today. And I saw him the next week and joined him in 2003. I set up the office in Geneva, right next to the airport. There was 70 people when I arrived. There was 500 when I left. The situation I had was a great brand, no doubt one of the world's best brands. Market conditions were good. They had really screwed up the integration. They were following a wrong strategy. They had transplanted the American strategy into Europe. I had no team. Many of the good people had left, and the others had remained. And I had quite a challenge on my hands because Ralph wanted to elevate the brand, he wanted to invest, he wanted to make it European luxury, which meant catwalk and flagship stores and more advertising. My boss, the worldwide president, wanted numbers, he wanted sales and profits. And I knew that we had to completely change the team and the strategy. So effectively, how were we going to do all those three at once? The description I came out with at the end of it was we ran our business in a brand right, business right way. And it was very different how the business was run in the US. Ralph would tell me the way he ran the business in the US was you had brand people who didn't think about profit, and then you had commercial people who didn't think about brand. And he would sit in the middle and effectively balance these excesses. I told him in Europe, that wasn't it. We had to run the business in a way that we really understood the brand. And the way we came up with it was brand right, business right. So don't do anything that screws the brand. On the other hand, don't do anything that's so extravagant that you can't afford it from a business standpoint. And running the business that way, everybody got it. Ralph would hate to hear me say that I got something from Wonderbra that I used in Ralph. But I once said to Ralph, he said to me, how are we doing? I said, we're doing really well. I said, we're selling very well. And he says, you don't have to sell Ralph Lauren. And I thought, what are you, nuts? Of course we have to sell Ralph Lauren. I didn't say that, of course. But what he was saying is that in the world of luxury, selling is kind of vulgar. Customers should come to you, you shouldn't have to go to them. But of course you do have to sell. I often say in luxury, you take the horse to the water, you then tell them this is exclusive water, this is beautiful water. Nobody else is going to get access to this water. And if you don't drink this water now, it'll be gone and you'll have missed your chance. And then just walk away and leave the horse it's going to drink at that point. Grabbing it by the ears and pushing it into the water really isn't going to work. So I come up with what I called RL selling, the different way that we would sell. We wouldn't push the numbers, we wouldn't be arrogant, which was a difficult concept for the Americans. We wouldn't compromise, we wouldn't always be saying yes. And Ralph loved that. He loved the fact that our selling approach was refined in that way. Fashion is very, very different. Although you might think it's all the same, we were the same as the Americans and the Europeans. The actual business of fashion is very, very different. One of the fundamental differences is calendar. The US is a constant shipping of new product. And it's very much where now, if you want to buy a nice winter coat in Manhattan, you can buy it in November or December. If you want to buy a Dolce & Gabbana coat in Europe, you've got to buy it in June or July because it's gone by the time the winter comes. The US is constant deliveries for wear now and followed by markdown. In Europe, you start delivering the autumn-winter in June and July. You don't mark it down until the January sale. You start delivering spring in December. You don't mark it down until July. It's very inefficient. And the US, but if you're not set up to respond to those calendars, you're really not going to be doing what the customer wants to buy. From a product standpoint, a huge differential on fit. The American people, of course, are bigger in every sense, taller and bigger. But also the whole sensibility. For an American to relax, it's very, very loose, it's very easy. Looks like the boyfriend look are very American, the big oversized sweater, the big shirt that you're wearing over a t-shirt and so on. The European look is much more about the tight short jackets and the tight pants and so on. So when an American relaxes, they really do relax. And Ralph would wear his fleece pants and his trainers and so on, which in a European context didn't really seem right. But there was a very significant sensibility difference between when it came to fit overall on product. So the sort of things that we did, chino pants. That's the only time I ever really took a risk with Ralph. Actually, when he asked why the chino pants weren't selling, I said, Ralph, we couldn't get arrested for those pants in Europe. And they really were commoditized, they were really cheap, they were untailored, they were soft fabric. So we went to an Italian manufacturer and did really, really nice tailored stretch chino that we call the signature pants. We introduced slim fit, and it's the same fabric, it's the same look, it's the same colour, but clearly it's much slimmer in its fit. The European polo shirts are now 90% slim fit, and in the US they're probably 5% slim fit overall. Outerwear, and America only has 2 seasons when you get down to winter and summer. You go from wearing a jacket to wearing a cashmere coat over your suit. In Europe we do wear down jackets. We'll wear down jackets over a suit, particularly in Germany and so on. None of that was getting made for Ralph Lauren. We had to go back and have it all specified. Ralph really loves the authenticity of products, so we had men's polo shirts effectively getting designed for women. but the sensibility again was very, very different. They had to be shorter, they had to be slimmer, they had to have deeper plackets, and we again went back and got all that sort of thing redone. The quality of the denim, the look of the denim was great, but the quality of denim, when you're competing in an American department store with Levi's and whatever, is not going to hack it when you come to Europe and you're competing with Acne and Diesel and G-Star and really high quality fabrics. So again, we had to up all of the fabrics. We opened some fabulous stores, Milan, just some of them, Cannes, San Moritz, Stad. We renovated all of the stores in Europe. We come up with a concept. In the States, you don't have specialty doors. You have department stores, you have outlets, you have shopping malls. You don't really have high streets anymore. But this was the majority of the business in Europe. So we come up with a way, we called it Prestige Partners, of doing Ralph Lauren furniture inside specialty doors. Department stores, of course, this is Harrods. We again convinced New York and Ralph to do licenses, and if you get into emerging markets and retail, if you're going in, as I think we heard earlier, if you get into the Middle East or Russia or Ukraine or anywhere in Eastern Europe, then having a licensed partner is fundamental. And we had great success. This is a Dubai Mall. We were into airports, and again, luxury airports in Europe, you really don't get them in the States. This is Charles de Gaulle. They're also in Heathrow and others. And outlets are huge in America. There honestly are too many Ralph Lauren outlets in America, as I'm sure you know. What we did here is differentiate the product. We had only so many, but they were huge. They made huge contributions to the profits. But we managed to do it in a way that didn't impinge on the wholesale full price business. We also had to change the whole advertising that Ralph loves spending. Was all very, very high end. It was the Financial Times, the Herald Tribune, Vogue and so on. It really wasn't cutting across our audience sufficiently. So we increased and spent a lot more money, but spent more on sponsorship and PR. So we did things like Wimbledon, and Ralph was perfect for Wimbledon. I remember taking him over the green jacket and saying, Ralph, this is what we have to design. And he said, if that's what it is, count me out. And we managed to convince him. It was actually done the green jacket so it would blend into the background of Wimbledon. But the Ralph Lauren look really didn't blend. But it looked fantastic. It allowed us to go and do great PR out there and do stunts and events that would effectively get us coverage in the Daily Mail, Daily Express and so on. I launched, Ralph's parents were Russian, so this was a whole big deal to him getting launched in Moscow and launched in Russia. And I launched here in Tretyakovsky Passage. Anybody that's been there, it's the centre of luxury shopping. We got tremendous PR, and the Russians loved the fact that he was like one of their own, if you like. He was an American icon who was coming back. And we were actually on the 10 o'clock news in Russia that night, so we get tremendous editorial coverage. We had a fashion show at the American ambassador's home. That's me bottom right with my wife and Ralph's brother. And it became the most successful store in the Ralph Lauren network globally. Something I was very proud of was the launch of Ralph Lauren in the South Bank in Paris, in Boulevard Saint-Germain. It's a store that contains a restaurant in it, which was a nightmare to run. I had American designers telling French chefs how to cook. And I was translating. And at one point, the Americans said that they wanted to put corn on the cob in the menu. And the French chef said, we feed it to pigs. That sounds negotiable. But once again, to get coverage, we had Ralph on like 15 different magazine covers, and we did a deal with the newsstand people to feature the covers on all these newsstands in Paris. So we effectively did an outdoor campaign. Ralph would never have agreed to an outdoor campaign, but we effectively did one, and it had we took over Paris. And actually, interestingly, your story about the ash cloud, we were stuck in Paris with Ralph, and I was praying to the God of CNN every morning. You know, just get this cloud away, they must leave. Everything was going so well. I was desperate to get rid of them. And they were there for 5 days. So finally, did it work? We had a phenomenal success. 400 million US became 1.5 billion US. We never had a down quarter at any point, never a down season. We had average growth of 16%. Never quite seen anything like it. We also didn't go down with the financial crisis. Burberry, Prada, Armani, everybody went down during that time. We went up less, but we didn't go down. So we had a great success in sales, hugely overshadowed by the success that we had on profits. I don't put the numbers up because they're not publicly disclosed. But starting back in 2004, it was less than 30 million, and by 2012, it was more than 300 million. So it really was a phenomenal return, largely tax-free because we're based in Switzerland. I shouldn't mention that either. There were some other benefits of working for Ralph Lauren. I'm assured that both these girls have this photograph on their bedside table. Maybe not. I got to play with Johnny Logan at bars, at brands all over Europe, at all the European, and we used to go around at Christmas and we do the Christmas thing. Anybody remember Johnny Logan? Won a Eurovision Song Contest twice. So he was playing with us in Munich. I did get on the Celtic board. I'm the athletic one in the front row. But, if you're looking for me, I managed to get off the board just in time, by the looks of things. And then at the end of it was great, but I was ready to do something much more of my making and my personal investment. So I looked to get into private equity. And I invested in this group, and I'm running this group, Aurum, 500 million retail business in the UK, but we're retailers of luxury watch and jewellery. We own Watches of Switzerland, Mappin and Webb. There's a Mappin Webb here. If anybody wants to buy themselves a Rolex, just tell them you know Brian, and they'll do you the best deal possible. I met the Queen too through Mappin and Webb. We made a brooch for her. I've never been so intimidated in my life, but she was very, very charming. Mappin and Webb are the crown jewellers. They have 2 royal warrants. So they're a tremendous brand. Goldsmith is our national brand. We also own Watch Shop, Watch Hut, and Watch Lab. This is our best store down in Regent Street. It's the best luxury watch store in the world, at 155 Regent Street. Mappin and Webb, you can see, is beautiful, as you can see very closely here in Glen Eagles. And then Goldsmith have some fabulous stores, particularly in northern England. This one's in Newcastle and Blackett Street. We have dominant market share with all of the big brands. We have over 50% of Rolex, we have over 70% of Patek, and we've pretty much got 30 to 50% of everybody else that you would think of. We really do dominate more than 50% overall of the luxury watch market, around 30% of the total watch market. Just a few slides. I thought you might just be a wee bit interested in the luxury watch market. Why is it all based in Switzerland? It's a really good study if you want to see how a country can effectively dominate and own an important category. It's all due to Mr. Happy here, John Calvin, the founder of the Reformation, founder of Presbyterianism. Ultimately, he actually decreed that jewellery should no longer be worn. It was too indulgent. So all of the jewellery makers turned their hand to making watches, and this was back in the early 17th century. The first ever watchmakers guild was formed in Geneva in 1601. They then found there was a huge demand for watches. This restricted practice in Geneva wasn't giving them enough capacity. So this guy, Daniel Jean Richard, came up with a new method of manufacturing, and he started to get component manufacturing done by dairy farmers in the Jura Mountains in the west of Switzerland. These farmers were all Huguenot Protestants, multilingual, very, very disciplined, great work ethic, and they had bugger all to do in the winter time because they were dairy farmers. So he had them all starting to make little wheels or cases or whatever it may be, and then he had other people bringing them together and making watches. And that remains the backbone of watchmaking in Switzerland today. Britain was once a big manufacturer of luxury watches, and back in 1800, Britain and Switzerland both had around 200,000 watches manufactured. By 1850, Britain was still making 200,000, but thanks to Jean Richard, Switzerland were making 2.2 million, and it was during that period that Switzerland became the dominant watchmaker of the world. And just to say, where all that manufacturing happened is in the west side of Switzerland, Neuchâtel, Biel, Bern, and so on, all the way up to Schaffhausen, which is IWC in the very north. The two best brands that are there are Patek and Rolex, the two best watch brands in the world. This is a fabulous ad that I'm sure you recognise. You never actually own a Patek Philippe, you're merely looking after it for the next generation. Very, very powerful. Tells you the product is wonderful, tells you it will last forever, tells you that it's a family heirloom. But it goes beyond that emotionally. It says it's your responsibility to buy a Patek for your son. You're letting him down if you don't buy a Patek. It's an insurance policy. You're not a real dad if you don't actually do it. I have two sons. I have two Pateks. I'm living evidence of that. But it actually epitomises what the whole industry stands for, and it's a wonderful ad from Patek. Patek really specialise in making the most complicated. Only in Switzerland could complicated be a good thing. When it comes to watches, complication means that it's a calendar, it's an annual calendar, it's a chronograph, or and it's all things that you have to have more mechanical elements to effectively inside the watch. So they made the most complicated watch ever, a Caliber 89, a pocket watch, for the 150th anniversary. And then they made this one on the right, the Grandmaster Chime, the most complicated wristwatch ever made for the 175th anniversary just 2 years ago. The one on the right would cost you a cool £2 million. But even if you had the 2 million, we couldn't get one for you. They only made 7. They took 7 years to make each of them. They only made 7. They have one of them in their museum. The other 6, we don't know where they went. We think Putin's got one of them, but we honestly don't know. The Caliber 89 watch. The watch prior to that was the most complicated was the Henry Graves watch. He bought it back in the 50s, probably for something like 100,000. It was sold at Sotheby's in 1999 for 11 million, and then 15 years later, it was sold again at Sotheby's for 24 million. So not that everybody would get that sort of return on investing in a Patek, but you genuinely can anticipate an appreciation in value when you buy carefully into something like a Patek Philippe. Interestingly, Patek do a Wonderbra as well. When you do the Patek training, they tell you there's vocabulary that you should use. And again, I think it's a good thing to think about if you're retailing luxury. They say don't talk about cost, talk about investment. Don't say the product is fragile, it's delicate. We don't give help, we provide assistance, and you can read the rest of it. But once again, it's just really helping define behaviour overall. The other one is Rolex, the most powerful brand in the world, I think, in the luxury world. It's owned by a charity. The guy who started it, or whose name I'll mention in a minute, left it as a foundation, left no kids or anything. So it's actually ran in his memory as a foundation. Their product is wonderful. They're the first ones to do waterproof, the first one to do the perpetual, the rotor automatic, the first Submariner, the first GMT. Really, really wonderful product. And then they decided to concentrate in those areas, concentrate below £20,000 as the key point, and then Patek pretty much take over above £20,000. This is the guy that started it all, Hans Wilsdorf. He actually started it in London. He was living in London. He had become a British citizen. The reason he left is the First World War. Actually, he left in 1919. And the reason he chose the name Rolex rather than Wilsdorf and Davis, which was the name before, again, was because of the First World War. He didn't want a German name. He could do everything right apart from tie his tie properly. He again was a great marketeer. When he produced the waterproof product, he got this lady, Mercedes Glint, who happened to be English despite the name, and she was the first to swim across the channel. He got her to wear the watch around her neck, and the first question she's asked when she comes out is checking the time, and it's perfect, and he gets it on the front page of the Daily Mail and the Daily Express. So pretty much the Wonderbra technique when you get down to it, a good 60 years earlier. He then marketed the product by putting it in an aquarium in the store with goldfish effectively swimming around it. So really innovative from a product standpoint and from a marketing standpoint. We were the first ever retailers back in 1919, Goldsmiths. The UK was the only market back then, and Newcastle Goldsmiths were the first ever retailers. It will soon be 100 years. So 2 major brands. We have all the other brands. We're currently UK based, but we're moving international pretty much as we speak. How are we doing? Not bad. I joined at the end of FY14 just to get the Duffy effect into this chart. We've done well in sales. We've done particularly well in EBITDA. The actual market for luxury watches right now is tough because of the Chinese and the Russians and so on that are spending a lot less. But despite that, we're gaining share and doing well. So just in conclusion, some lessons and suggestions. I really believe in this definition of isn't. Throughout today, we've heard great things, starting with Mike this morning. Analysis, KPIs, looking at the market, looking at the competition. That's where you find the opportunity. Based on that, you set your goals and you have your strategy. You get the team on board and off you go. When you're doing brands, you have to have a balance, in my view. You have to always be looking after the shareholder while at the same time managing your brand, and both can be done at the same time. Whenever you'll do negotiations throughout your entire career, buying and selling companies, distribution deals, suppliers, whatever, what I've found is very important is that you spend more time thinking about it from the other guy's point of view. You disarm the other guy when you start the discussion, and you tell him you know what his interests really are. So I always spend time researching what the other guy's interests might be, and I just really believe it's a simple and obvious thing. Everything, whether it's a presentation, a meeting, an interview or whatever, just there's nothing like preparation just to make sure that you're going to get the best out of it. I hate getting into a meeting and somebody coming in and saying, okay, what's the agenda? I pretty much ask those people to leave the meetings. If you haven't come prepared and you haven't put together your thoughts, then you shouldn't be there, you're wasting your time. Last thing I want to say is I found being Scottish a huge advantage. I found that as soon as you introduce yourself as Scottish, people think you're dependable, you're hard-working, you're non-pretentious, you're independent, ironically enough. People want to do business with Scottish people and give us a great deal of credit. They think we'll be trustworthy, and they think we'll be dependable. But what I've found, certainly in my sector, in apparel and luxury and retail and fashion and so on, we do seem to carry a burden of a lack of confidence in it. Scottishness could really, really be marketed in the luxury consumer world without any doubt. There's no question that today, tremendous examples of Scottish success. But within the luxury world, fashion world and so on, it's yet to be done. And you take a brand like Brunello Cucinelli, who you may know in Italy, cashmere, is worth billions. And it should be Scottish. And the difference between him doing it and us doing it is just that self-confidence and belief that I think conferences like today really help us address and really help us get. Thanks very much for your attention.